Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby.
Hello and welcome back to Movies vs. Capitalism, an anti-capitalist movie podcast. I'm Frank Capello.
And I'm Rivka Rivera. Hey, Frank.
Hey, Rivka. We're back. I'm back. My back is feeling better.
Ooh.
I don't know, that just...
Back with the segues.
You know what? That's 4 years of conservatory acting training and improv training, just right off the dome.
First thought, best thought.
Just don't think. Trust your instinct. Yes, we took a brief hiatus. Our regular listeners will know I was dealing with still am dealing with a pretty severe back injury, and I really, really appreciate all of the kind messages and well wishes that our listeners sent when we announced that we had to take a break. Truly, it like lifted my spirits a lot.
Yeah, I just gotta say, what an awesome community that also just continually mirrors back these anti-capitalist values and reminders of like, you don't have to give into work till you die, because we were struggling with it. We're like, we want to get more episodes out. How can we? And we're just like, had to remind each other, and you helped us with that. Like, chill.
Yeah, especially in times like this. Yeah, especially when your body's like, I can't stand up.
Yeah.
So fortunately, I am able to stand up now. We're getting it dealt with. MRI is next week.
I did visit Frank, and no lies, you were bent over.
Yeah. So feeling better. We're back now. Episodes might be coming out a little more sporadically, maybe every other week. We're still figuring out the release cadence, but we are back. We're going to be putting new stuff out because we wanted to, because we miss doing the show and we miss all of you. So we're back now, and we have really too much to catch up on. I think we took a break during the most eventful 3 weeks.
It's not fair, actually. Yeah. It'll seem like we were gone so much longer than it really was not that long, but the amount of stuff that happened, it seems like we were off for a year.
It was not that long, but in that time, there was an attempted assassination attempt against Donald Trump. Biden dropped out of the election. Kamala subbed in, and she has now chosen Tim Walz as her VP. So I guess let's start at the top. I mean, the Trump assassination, I guess we could start there. There's not much to say about it other than, like, you know, what is to be expected from a fascist who spews the most hateful rhetoric in modern American politics.
Yeah.
It wasn't shocking, although I think the big takeaway now that we're 3 weeks out from it, is just like how quickly the news cycle can change. Because I remember like the day,
Yep.
2 days after, I got dinner with some family, and some family members were like, oh, he's fucking winning. He's fucking... After that assassination attempt, after he stood up, pumped his fist in the air and said, he is going to win this election. Game over. It's done. And now everything has changed.
In all fairness, everything has changed. But not just the news. I mean, in all fairness, it felt that way with Biden.
Yes.
Still running against him. It was
100%.
It was it was like absolutely, I mean, everybody, it was such a downer. It felt like, fuck, it's done.
Yeah. And it probably was, to be quite honest.
Let's talk a little bit about the aftermath, because even in the aftermath, so much happened. There was that wild New York Times op-ed that was like, "We are all MAGA." Do you remember that?
Oh my God, that's right. Yeah, we are all MAGA today. Jesus.
That was
Christ.
It was. Oh my God. Talk about fucking news. Talk about like the media not knowing what, and like, okay, fine, an op-ed, but what the actual fuck? We are all MAGA today? Absolutely fucking not.
You don't have to publish that. You don't have to. It's like,
nope.
We don't need to both sides fascism. Like, it doesn't have to. We don't have to do that, New York Times. Thank you.
Yeah, but that's equal. That's equality. That's discourse, right?
Yeah, that's fair and balanced journalism for sure.
That's fair.
Yeah. That's what the New York Times, especially in the last 10 months, the New York Times has been lauded for its honest and clear-eyed reporting, especially on what's happening in Gaza.
We are all MAGA today. That was, yeah. And then this is my favorite. Sorkin came out with
Aaron Sorkin.
Aaron Sorkin,
Academy Award-winning screenwriter Aaron Sorkin.
Who, you know, I think, like, I will say, like, this is one where I'm like, the politics I don't ride with, the person I don't ride with, but the shows, I still love these shows. Like, there's something about Sorkin's writing that I will just always, like, I love.
Guy's a great writer. Doesn't know how to write female characters in extreme misogynist, horrendous neoliberal politics, but he's inarguably a very good screenwriter and writer of dialogue.
Absolutely. that cocaine riddle. I love it. So good. So Sorkin said, you know what? It's time for me to chime in once again. Trump was just, they tried to assassinate him. And I think what's going to save this moment is if...
What's going to save the country?
What's going to save the country is if Joe Biden takes Mitt Romney as his VP.
Yeah, I believe that was the central message of Aaron Sorkin.
Even as I said it, I'm questioning it because I'm like, that what? Mitt Romney, let me remind you all, a Republican who once put his dog on the top of his fucking car on a family road trip where he was riding on a freeway at like 60 miles an hour.
I mean, that's
sick.
Yeah.
Like that's a sick person.
Yeah, that's...
And made a joke about it. Like part of his, like, he thought it would be really charming to Americans if he talked about how the dog like was so afraid it like shat down the back of the rear view window. I just like appalling.
Horrific.
Appalling.
Yeah, that's, I mean, disgusting, like human pet owner behavior. Also, you know,
and then there's all the other shit.
And then there's also then there's like all of his politics and the fact that he like ran a private equity firm. I think Bain Capital was private equity, but basically made all his money just like strip mining companies and just doing the private equity thing of just like buying companies, strip mining them, and then just dumping them for profit. So this is just like a guy who's made his money doing like just like the most horrendous private equity Wall Street bullshit. A completely corporate friendly moderate Republican, just like someone who is not going to be as like outwardly disgusting and hateful as Donald Trump, but someone who is going to pass all of the corporate friendly policies that the Republican Party want. That's who Mitt Romney is.
But I do think it's actually very telling on like what that centrist point of view is like, if we take someone who's a quote unquote moderate Republican, which means nothing, right? The Democratic Party has become so centrist it is Republican.
Yeah.
But just this still holding on to this idea that like that's what we're missing is like we need to find a center. And that idea that if we take a Romney Biden ticket, like that's what America is gonna rally behind. It's just so out of touch. It's so out of touch. It's so like you are not in the world at all with people who are outside of a capitalist class. You're just so... You really believe that the issue is that there's too much extremes and people just want something in the middle. Like as if everyone's so fucking dumb that they're not aware of this massive wealth disparity that somehow if we meet in the middle, that's a middle class. No, there is no the middle when you have a 1% and the rest of the population who have nothing is not a middle.
Yes, absolutely. And whatever centrist policies exist, which I don't really actually believe that centrist policies exist. I believe that like most centrists are actually like crypto conservatives. They don't even realize it because like
exactly
because American politics has moved so far to the right over the last 40 years. But centrist politics and policies are only like their most explicit goal is to just like maintain the status quo, is to like keep things as they are, do not change anything, do not make extreme changes, blah, blah, blah. Like both sides are bad. Keep in mind this like centrist triangulation that Democrats have been doing since the, really like the end of Carter and then obviously like the Clinton administration and Obama and then the Republican, the last 40 years has been 40 years of either conservative or centrist policies that have resulted in the wealth inequality, the racial inequality, like the Supreme Court being stacked by these like arch conservatives. Like centrism is what got us to where we are right now. So like the idea that like more centrism is the thing that's gonna heal the country is it's just so fucking diluted. It's like that is what the Democrats especially have been doing for the last 40 years. And look around. It is not working. It does not work. But fortunately, Sorkin's op-ed was rendered irrelevant almost immediately after it was published, because I think it was like the day after or 2 days after he published that inane bullshit, Biden announced that he was dropping out of the race.
And it happened so fast. We got a text from dear friend Harvey K, and it was almost like Harvey somehow was on it like so fast, like truly the first person to.
I mean, Harvey's got those connections. Harvey's got those real connections.
Got the connects.
Mm-hmm.
But to the point where we were like, is it? Even Harvey was like, I don't know if this is real or fake. It's real. It's real. It was because it was like the letter, right? That Biden put out.
I mean, we're both thrilled about this. I fully believe that Biden would have sleptwalked us into a second Trump term, like no question.
No question.
No question. So I was thrilled to see him stepping down and Kamala stepping up. And don't get me wrong, we'll talk about Kamala. Not a fan of Kamala, but like just I'm glad that it's not Joe Biden. And there's been a lot of talk of like what drove Biden to drop out. And I think there's probably like several prongs in it. But I think the main ones and the ones worth discussing would be one, that leftists and progressives have been screaming about this since last year, screaming about this. And anyone that's on the left, anyone that's like not just fully bought into Democratic Party bullshit, anyone with any sway or influence has just been like, yo, you need to drop this guy. This guy is the threat to democracy, Joe Biden. So there's that. And then also, and I think sadly, what actually had more influence on his decision was the donor class just zipped up their wallets. They literally, the Democratic Party donor class organized, and they were like, hey, Democrats, we're not giving you the money. We're not giving you the money until this guy goes. And it had nothing to do with his horrendous policies on Israel and Gaza. It had nothing to do with his shitty record of not getting anything done. It had nothing to do with the fact that he's fucking ancient. It was the debate. It was the Trump debate that people actually saw what we on the left have been saying for over a year, that this guy is not up for the task. And they were like, oh shit, oh man, he's actually bad at this. He can't win. So that unfortunately, the donor class withholding their money, I think, probably had the most influence on Democratic Party leadership and Biden ultimately.
So then enter Kamala.
Enter stage left, Kamala Harris. The spotlight catches her face. She laughs.
Yeah. I mean, the other piece is just how quickly, like you were saying, I think what was remarkable was it went from such like we are dead in the water right after the assassination attempt to all of a sudden all this energy, all of this money, all of this fundraising. It feels like we had it like
the single largest fundraising day in American electoral history, right?
Yeah. So we are talking about Rocky today. I don't think we talk about this in our discussion, but this feels Rocky-esque.
Yeah, like you got called up. Like this is your moment. This is your shot.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't even think last year people would think like, well, they'll put Kamala up. I don't even think 2 months ago people were necessarily thinking that. He was so determined to Weekend at Bernie's this thing all the way into 2025. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. I mean, keep in mind that like during the 2020 primary, Kamala was doing like was one of the worst candidates. Like, got no delegates, was dropped out very early on, was not a strong candidate. So I think people were like, we don't want it. We can't be her. But then couldn't be Biden, so here we are. And I mean, like I said earlier, not a fan of Kamala. Kamala, the top cop, spent a lot of her career just like putting low-income Black people in jail, rejects a lot of progressive policies like Medicare for all and others. And I'm not thrilled about her as the nominee. She's just another Democratic Party corporate-friendly politician. She's just more of the same. Maybe she'll obviously be a little bit better on Biden than things just by dint of her being, I don't know, like 100 years younger than him and also a woman of color and not like just like an old crusty white guy. But I don't have high hopes. Do you? I feel like it's just a better shot at beating Trump. And that's, I guess, good enough for now.
Yeah, I really have no like firm, I have opinions, but I guess I'm really like, especially as we're talking about how much has been in flux. I mean, I guess I'm just thinking about the places that I love hearing the discourse on. I think Brianna Joy of Bad Faith is like always someone I'm listening to because it's always a reminder of like why we should still be fighting for third party politics and the ways to do that. And I don't know, she's always asking the right question. So that's kind of like right now I'm just doing a lot of listening, because I think it's a complex moment. It's like there's so much relief having Kamala. You know, I think there's just so much relief that Biden stepped down.
Mm-hmm.
We should talk about Tim Walz. Like that's like, I think there's relief. And I think the hope that I'm finding is feeling like, oh, our protesting has not been in vain. Like there is impact. And we're seeing like globally, we're seeing these moments of impacts of like these protest movements, these social movements. And like I'm taking the hope where I can get it. And I think you're right. Like strategically, I do tend to feel like, things will strategically be better for organizers. Like we're not going to be distracted on fighting certain things that we'd be fighting with under Trump.
Definitely.
But I'm also with you. I'm finding it hard to, when I have friends who are like, aren't you so excited? And like, and I'm like, I don't want to take away, I don't want to take away from someone's excitement who's fine. Like, I think there's many things there to be excited about, but I think it's important. Again, it goes back to the conversation we have on this podcast all the time of like, can you love something and be critical of it? Can you hold that complexity?
Yes.
But I think it's really hard for people to hear any kind of criticism. And I think that's we have to hold firm on. You can hear criticism of these candidates. We have to, because we got to keep pushing them. You can't just be like, okay, great. Now I give up and now free reign to do whatever. Like, absolutely not. I mean, a lot of movements are saying that's why we have Tim Walz and not Shapiro, because people were like, absolutely not holding firm.
Yes. And yes, big time. And this might actually be an example of a place where progressives and leftists using their voice, using their platforms, and, organizations voicing their opinions to Kamala's team, that Shapiro would have been a divisive VP pick, specifically because of his position on Israel and Gaza and some, a lot of stuff that came up out of his past, some like writing he did as a college student, the fact that he like volunteered for the Israeli military or like a special unit at some point when he was younger. But basically that like, as soon as we knew that it was pretty much down to Shapiro and Walz, a lot of people on the left were like, yo, just pick the guy who's not going to like divide the base further. Like you have like this is such a fucking layup. Just make the politically expedient choice, which is the one that actually unifies the base a little bit more than Josh Shapiro does. And me, like, I think a lot of leftist progressives are like, of course they're just going to pick Shapiro. They're the Democrats. They always make the worst decision possible. And I was very heartened to see that that's not what happened. And this was a specific case where the donor class, the Democratic Party donor class, was like, we want Shapiro. Like, he's our guy. So Kamala actually went against what the donors wanted in this instance. And that has been the most sort of like heartening, encouraging development in the last several weeks, is like, oh, maybe Kamala is actually willing to listen to the left flank of the party. I'm not going to give her too much credit. I'm not going to give the Democrats too much credit. They still have a lot of time to fuck shit up. But that was something. I just wanted to point that out because I think it, like you said, it's an example of how pushing these politicians is a good thing and actually delivers results when we need them sometimes.
Absolutely. Did you see this thing about, I did enjoy this, Tim Walz calling the Republicans weird?
Yeah.
That really got to them. I enjoyed that.
The whole weird thing has really just completely thrown Republicans off their game. And at first I was like, this is such like schoolyard. This is just like such like schoolyard bullying kind of politics. And I wasn't about it. But then as I saw how much of an effect it was having on Republicans, I was like, okay, go ahead. Call them weird. Whatever. You know what? Whatever gets the job done.
I like the destabling effect of it. Like, just plain script writing, since we are a movies podcast. Mm-hmm. Like, great choice of word. Weird as hell is like, it names it and they don't know what to do with it. And that's what we kind of want. Like, if anything, seeing that last debate with Biden and Trump, you're like, we need someone to at least like take it off the golf course.
Yeah, my God.
And I think it's just exactly that destabilizing thing of like, we don't know what to do with weird. You could call them racist, sexist, like all these things, and they're like, yep. Weird. Can't handle it.
Yeah, I wish it was like a little bit more of a descriptive insult, something that actually called them out for being like the stupid fascists that they are. But like, look, weird. It's throwing them off.
But I think the thing is, they're like, yeah, we are cool.
Yeah, we are stupid fascists.
They're down with that.
Who cares?
Weird. Can't handle it.
The last thing I'll say is that, like, in this discussion of like Democrats and Republicans, something we'll often hear from leftists is like, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are the exact same. And I don't subscribe to that take. I think that's lazy analysis, to be quite honest. I think the Republican Party is cartoonishly evil and like the party of fascism. And I think the Democratic Party is like 10% less bad than that. So like, I'm able to maintain that I think the Democratic Party is useless and corrupt and backed by some of like the worst corporate interests in our country, while still acknowledging that like the Republican Party is worse, and like it would be worse under a second Trump term. It would be worse under another 4 years of Republican rule. So anyone who's voting for harm reduction, anyone who's voting to keep Trump out of office, like, I get it. I'm not going to like talk you down off of that ledge.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, we're in blue state, so like doesn't really matter for us. Like, I don't have to vote for Kamala and have to worry too much about who's actually going to sit in the White House at the end of the day. So,
well, and I think simultaneously to that point, for people who are thinking about how are the different strategic ways to use their vote, like voting third party, Green Party, it makes a difference depending on the state you're in, because the more votes that party gets, to my understanding, the more opportunities that third party gets in terms of like their opportunities as a party moving forward. So that's also a way to use your vote strategically depending on where you are. And I think strategy is like the key term here. And I love how you're phrasing that. Like, I think that's a really helpful as we're moving forward, being like, are we all ultimately, most people do want the same things.
Yeah.
And that we all have so much more in common in that sense than we don't. And yeah.
And it's an incredibly complicated and very emotionally loaded and charged election. And there's so many factors in play. So like, you know, you got to vote with your heart and your gut and what's telling you is the right thing to do. And that ultimately is up to you. Woof. All right. Wow. Just caught up on, I think, the most eventful 3 weeks in modern American history. All right, that was a bit of a long one. So let's get to our conversation for today. But before we do, we just want to remind our audience that we do not sell ads on this show. We rely completely on community support to keep the show going, and you can do that by subscribing to our Patreon.
That's right. For just $5 a month, you get access to new bonus episodes, which will be coming, and our entire back catalog of bonus episodes, which are really great. Our Patreon link is in the episode description in your podcast player, or you can find it at mvcpod.com. And thank you so much to those of you who've been able to subscribe. It makes a huge difference for Frank and I. It really takes care of all the labor that we put into the show, and we deeply appreciate it.
Yes, thank you all so much.
Also, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast on your podcast player so you don't miss new episodes.
And there's gonna be new episodes. All right, we're gonna take a quick break. We'll be right back with our conversation about Rocky with Pam Capalad and Dyalekt. Hey everyone, we've got an amazing organization we want to tell you about called Anti-Capitalism for Artists.
Anti-Capitalism for Artists is an education-based community dedicated to raising the class consciousness of artists.
Their core offering, the 10-week Intro to Anti-Capitalism course, is designed to be accessible to anyone looking to get familiar with a wide range of anti-capitalist concepts and ideas.
They do this by offering an eclectic array of free virtual and in-person events year-round, geared to meet all manner of knowledge backgrounds. Frank and I both took the course in different cohorts, and it really was amazing. You get to meet with a group of people who are interested in anti-capitalism, you build solidarity, and it's also a lot of fun.
Yeah, they put together such an amazing, comprehensive reading list from anti-capitalist writers from all different types of tendencies, from Marx to black radicalism to intersectional feminism to queer liberation to modern-day anti-capitalists. So you really get a firm grounding in a diverse and wide array of concepts.
Artists of all kinds, abilities, and professional statuses are welcome to join A4A's community, where they can learn, build community, and co-create their own events and offerings.
You can learn more, reach out, or support their work by donating at anticapitalismforartists.com or find them on Instagram at anticapitalismforartists.
Love you, comrades. Now back to the show.
Today we are joined by Pamela Capalad and Dyalekt. Pamela is a certified financial planner and accredited financial counselor. She's been in financial services since the last bad time, and we'll get through this one too. Her mission is to help people who feel ashamed or embarrassed about money to have a safe and friendly place to talk about it and make real financial progress. Dyalekt has been an MC, theaterer, and educator for over 20 years. He is the director of pedagogy at Pockets Change, where he uses hip-hop to change the way we talk about money. Together, they founded financial liberation platforms Pocket Change, See Change, and Get Shameless. They regularly teach workshops, make art, and speak on how art, culture, and media are used to perpetuate racial wealth inequality and how artists have the power to change the narrative. Wow. Welcome to Movies versus Capitalism.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
We're so excited to be here.
Yes. Thank you so much.
We're so excited to have you. Yeah, I'm really excited just hearing your bios read. I have so many questions, but I just want to start with, can you tell us more? Because it relates to literally everything we talk about on this podcast.
Everything we talk about, yep.
Yeah. I mean, and I think with purpose. I moved to New York. I went to college to study acting. and acting is super racist, and that led me to writing. I'm a mixed race, so like I came up and they were like, well, we don't know what the family looks like, and I was like, well, y'all don't know the Black family, I'm gonna write stories about it. And then that led me more into the music and into the education. And as I got into education, I saw how all of these industries that were exploitative of me and people like me was part of a bigger system, and the problems that young people had fed into all of this. And I'm making a long story short here. We built this web because we see the web that oppresses us.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. And I
Mm.
roped him into finance, but now he's officially in. I roped myself into finance. I actually have a literature degree. Surprise. I graduated with a literature degree.
Oh,
I
wow.
know, right? I'm actually a writer at heart, and that's what I thought I wanted to do. That's still what I want to do. But I took this random summer job teaching money camps for kids. I was like, "Oh, this will be fun." I was teaching them in college in between like school. And it literally changed my life. I was 20 years old teaching kids about the stock market and budgeting and credit cards and real estate. And I was like, why didn't anyone teach this to me when I was a kid? Why didn't my parents teach this to me? And it
Yep.
became like this eye-opening moment where I said, this needs to be in every school in America. And I don't know enough about it. So let me take my literature degree and go be in finance. So I got my foot in the door at a wealth management firm in 2008. Perfect timing.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah. 2008, I literally saw Lehman Brothers go down while I was working there. 25% of our clients were Lehman Brothers clients. And my plan was to learn everything I could about finance in like 2 years. And I was writing a financial literacy curriculum with another money camp person who was an educator. And we were like, this is going to be in every school in America. I just have to learn everything I can. And 7 years later, I was still in it. And I was like, holy crap, there's so much to learn. And this financial system is so insidious. And we brought Dyalekt in to
Well, I
teach.
guess
Oh,
we
yeah.
should. We're married.
We're
so
married. Oh, yeah,
we
we're
have
also
like
married.
social situations too. Well, we met on the humble just as people and as educators,
Yes,
and we
it's
got
true.
to nerd out about that. I was talking about
Mhm.
how I started leaning into education. My backup job was to be a lawyer, and I was working for the lawyers who represented the cops who shot Amadou Diallo, who was an immigrant who was shot nearly 50 times by the
Wow.
police. They came in the room popping champagne bottles. And I talked to the lawyers I was cool with, and they were like, you sound like you're going to end up a tired public defender, or you're going to give up and sell out or something like that. And I left the whole place.
Yeah.
And I started going into education. And because I was really getting into this hip hop thing, I'd only started rapping my senior year of high school. So it was like just a fun thing. And as I got into the culture, I went to Crotona Park and I saw the B-boys and the true school DJs and all of that. And I was like, why do I want to learn so much about this? And I would watch
Mm,
the tapes and I would talk to the elders, but I wasn't concerned with school,
yeah.
and I never cared about those. And I took the principles that I'd learned from hip hop and started applying. It was still early in the age of hip hop education, but it was basically similar to like the multiple intelligences stuff where these kids express different ways. So they also learn different ways. And if we can help them figure out how they learn, they can be more excited about learning. And I was bringing this to schools, after school programs, and everybody was always like, well, this is cool, but how are you going to beat the regents? And then we came up with regent busters, and they were like, well, this is cool, but then how are they going to get a job? How is this going to get them
Yep.
paid? So it was always something that was a concern. And in the indie hip hop world, there's only two kinds of rappers: rappers who rap about liking having money, and rappers who rap about not liking having money. Right? It's a thing that we kind of were pit against
Mhm,
each
mhm.
other in this
Yep.
thought process.
Yep.
And she really opened my, because I was very much the like, yeah, family, respect, community, yada yada. She really brought me into the idea that paying attention to my money is taking care of my community. And kind of the same game that was told to the pop rappers, where they told them they needed to love money, we were told we needed to hate money so there could be conflict.
Yeah,
And for
absolutely.
us to pull ourselves out of that
Mm.
would be to understand our finances and have our own back so we could take care of our peoples.
Yeah. So the educator friend who I was working with on this curriculum, we called it Pockets Change. And we decided we need to start teaching these workshops ourselves because no teacher wanted to teach financial literacy in their classroom. They're like, I'm not equipped. What do you mean I have to teach it? So we went back and started teaching it. And we brought Dyalekt in because an organization had asked us to teach a job prep workshop. And we were like, yeah, we can teach one. And we did not have a job prep program. So we brought him in and he brought the hip hop to the finance. And Pocket Change is now a hip hop and finance organization where we use hip hop pedagogy to help kids understand their relationship with money and their relationship with the financial system at large.
And it doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to make a rap song, although we do have a song contest where kids can make rap songs about personal finance. It's more of using the things that created hip hop, the need for community, the inherent sense of rhythm, the African drum, using as a way for us to understand things that are in code, all of these pieces to be able to get honest with young folks about things that matter to them and find what matters to them. Because that's how you end up budgeting. You know, our big budgeting thing we say is, you know, you never stick to a budget you don't believe in. So why are we going to start our budgeting with, well, you have to pay your bills and then sleep on a rock?
Yeah. Right. And then we kept working together. I actually left wealth management in 2015 and started my own registered investment advisor firm, Brunch and Budget. So I ran that for 10 years. I actually just closed it down a couple months ago. Whew. But I was literally meeting people for brunch and talking about their finances. It all started with a friend needing help. She'd never checked her credit score before, and she was afraid. And I was like, do you want to do it over brunch or something?
Yeah, you know, our artistic community, our indie arts community, even more so than your more 9-to-5 general public, are so unsure of our finances. We're told that we have to be starving artists, and that if we get rich, we're a sellout, and if we don't make money, we're a hobbyist. It's like all of these things pulling us in all these directions, so we don't know what to do. And then we don't know what retirement means, because what do you mean retire?
Yeah, what does that mean? And so I ran Brunch and Budget for 10 years. And in that time, I just started meeting more people of color, just naturally. In wealth management, there was virtually no clients of color. And I just started hearing the stories of my clients. And a lot of my clients of color were first generation something in this country, first generation college grad, first generation to be able to buy a home, first generation artists. So many of our clients were first generation in their family to say, yes, I'm an artist as my profession. And so we started Sea Change as a way for creators of color to come together and learn about how the racial wealth divide affects their personal finances, how to navigate the system, heal their relationship with money. And most recently, we actually took an interpersonal neurobiology course, and we're continuing to study it, an interpersonal neurobiology course for practitioners of color, which is the neuroscience of how we are hurt and how we heal in relationships, so people can really understand where their money trauma comes from and be able to move through it. And that's something that we were running into over and over and over with our clients of color. Was they got all the tips, we showed them everything, we showed them all the worksheets, we were coaching them, and there were walls that they kept hitting.
And financial literacy says that you are just financially illiterate if you can't achieve those things. If you can't do the 50-30-20 rule or whatever arbitrary rules that they give you, that you failed and it doesn't work. But what we found with the neuroscience dealing with the systemic stuff is we can see how the systemic issues create internal strife and self-blame. And those things are the reasons why you spent not in accordance with your values. It's not because you have no discipline or willpower.
And so we're able to actually give our clients the language to say, oh, I'm reacting this way to my money because making money or saving money makes me feel unsafe. And how do I process that so that I can get to a safe place when it comes to actually having money?
Wow. This is so stunning. I mean, I think this is radicalizing incredible work that you're doing. I know Frank and I talk about it all the time, how we wish we had in our training, because we went to school together, financial literacy for artists. That would have been such a game changer, and how crucial that is, but also just the piece that you're talking about, which is clarity, which actually I think relates a lot to the movie we're going to talk about, and the character's journey is like the opportunity for clarity to lead to class consciousness, and that the vagueness is the place where capitalism can seep in and take advantage. And so fear, I believe, leads to vagueness, and trauma, like you're talking about, can lead to just wanting to pull away and not look. And then that's how the system uses that to perpetuate itself and is a vulture to those kind of things. And so this clarity, I think, is so radical. And I think there's a very real reason why capital and the capitalist class would not necessarily want to implement that inside of public education. Because it's intentional to keep people not aware.
And I also want to point out my appreciation for what might appear as almost an inherent contradiction about what you do, Pam, because when you emailed and you were like, I'm an anti-capitalist financial advisor. I was like, hang the phone up a second. What
That's
is
not
happening?
real.
That's, I don't know. And I did my due diligence. I did my research, and I like watched a bunch of your videos on Instagram, and I was like, oh, and I heard you speaking about the system and the way that like this, like everything you just laid out about the way that this system oppresses people in different ways, different groups in different ways. And I was like, this is awesome, because I think someone would hear financial advisor and be like, well, that you can't do that and be anti-capitalist. But I think it's a great example of operating within this system in a role that is traditionally built to uphold the system, but you're doing it in a way that in that like demystifies the system and actually helps people that usually don't have access to that kind of knowledge, that kind of education. So I think it's super, super fucking cool.
It's awesome.
And we could talk about.
I can't wait to. Yeah.
And we could talk about this forever, because like Rivka said, we bring this up constantly on this podcast about financial literacy. But I'm sure we're gonna have a lot to say about this movie, so we should probably jump into it.
Let's get into this. This is so exciting. I'm sure our listeners are pumped. We're watching the first of an epic series, but we're talking about Rocky 1, written by Sylvester Stallone, directed by John Avildsen, starring Sylvester Stallone, Talia Shire, Carl Weathers, Burt Young, and Burgess Meredith. The budget for this movie was $960,000, and it made $117 million worldwide. Adjusted for inflation, that's a $5.3 million budget and a gross of $646 million.
Damn. So that's
wow.
That margin is crazy.
Wild.
Amazing.
Rocky tells the story of Rocky Balboa, a middling Philadelphia boxer, part-time mob enforcer, and a parent neighborhood guidance counselor who gets a supremely rare chance to fight the world heavyweight champion, Apollo Creed. A match in which Rocky strives to go the distance by going all 15 rounds to prove to everyone that he's not a bum. Frank, you outdid yourself with that
thank you.
description. That was good.
It's like, who the fuck appointed him the guidance counselor of the neighborhood? We'll get into it. All right, so a little bit of historical context for when this film was released on December 3rd, 1976. The other movie we've covered from this year is Network. So what's happening in the U.S. in 1976? Happy Days is the most popular TV show. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest wins the Oscar for Best Picture, and The Mary Tyler Moore Show wins its second Emmy for Outstanding Comedy Series. In January, the United States vetoes a United Nations resolution that calls for an independent Palestinian state. In April, Apple Computer is founded by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. In July, the United States celebrates its bicentennial, 200 years of being the best and never doing anything wrong. And in November, Jimmy Carter is elected the 39th President of the United States. The average family income is $16,000. A new house costs around $43,000, and the retail price for a gallon of gas averages 59 cents. Also, a Big Mac is 75 cents. Man,
wow.
I would love a 75-cent Big Mac. I would eat a Big Mac every day if they were 75 cents. So, Pam, Dyalekt, the first thing we start the conversation with, we like to ask our guests, why did you choose this movie to talk about on this podcast?
Ooh, okay, I guess.
So many reasons.
Yeah, Rocky is something, I mean, one, it's always been in my life as someone who was born in Philadelphia, because it's an inescapable Philadelphian thing.
The statue. We're going to talk about the statue, right? There's a statue of Rocky.
Sure, yeah.
I'm like, what?
He is our...
We
have plenty of Philadelphian sports stars, but none of them are the hero that Rocky is. I mean, mostly because most of them are black. But, you know, they love this fictional guy.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I was talking about being mixed. My dad is a white Russian Jewish immigrant. And also, by the way, shout out to all my Jews. Remember that never again means never again. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Free Palestine, all that good stuff. But he came to Philadelphia. He was an immigrant. He actually, as a baby fleeing the Holocaust, ended up in Philly and became a big bodybuilder. He kind of was like Rocky. He was Mr. Pennsylvania, so he's the largest, most muscular man in Pennsylvania. He went out to Mr. Universe and was a underdog. He didn't win, but I found this quote from him, which feels very similar to me in my artwork versus my education work, where he said he doesn't care if he wins. He just is excited that his students get to see him modeling success. So I have like a weird personal connection to it. Also, many of my family on my mom's side were boxers. My uncle was a nutritionist for Meldrick Taylor, who's one of Philadelphia's great boxers. Philly has this great boxing tradition. So in all of its pieces, I have a lot of personal connection to it. Plus, in the work that we do, when we talk about racial capitalism, when we talk about senses of belonging, when we talk about unity, community, art, and all of those things, that's all really all up in Rocky for good and for ill, often simultaneously.
Yeah, totally.
Mm.
And I had never seen the movie as a kid, and he showed it to me for the first time as an adult.
Because I was like, yeah, you have to see this thing that has a lot to do with me.
You're gonna learn a lot about me.
I know, right? I really did. But I loved the movie. So I saw it for the first time as an adult, and you know the tropes, the Adrian, the training montage, all of the things, the running up the steps, all of those scenes that like I saw parodied as a kid all the time, like there's Simpsons scenes about it and things like that. And so when I finally got to see it, I was like, wow, this is actually a really great movie. I like wanted to see Rocky 2 immediately because I was like, okay, now I need to see Rocky win. Spoiler alert, y'all, he doesn't win at the first one. But I need to see Rocky win. And we ended up watching the first 3 movies because I was just so charmed by this character and so charmed by his underdog story. And the story felt so familiar. It was really interesting because Dyalekt asked me, what is your connection to him? You're like, I am a Filipino Chinese immigrant. I moved here when I was 2 years old. And, you know, he's like a white guy from Philly. And I was like, I don't know. You just love an underdog story, you know? The relatability of his character was just so palpable when he showed it to me.
I will admit this was also my first time ever watching Rocky.
Oh,
I had never seen it. I'm not a big like sports movie person. I was a theater kid, so I never was like, I gotta watch all the old sports. But this, I agree, Pam. Like I was really blown away by how well made and well written, well acted, across the board this film was. It makes sense now why, because it won Best Picture the following year.
Yep. It beat Network.
It beat Network.
It beat Network.
And Taxi Driver.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
it was
that
it
year
was
was bananas.
it was stacked, and Rocky won.
And Rocky won, yeah. So, I mean, we could debate if it deserves to win over Taxi Driver or Network.
I think that it's interesting the implications politically and why, but we'll get into it.
But at the same time, I was like, now I understand why why Stallone became an instant celebrity A-lister and why they made, I don't know, like 5, 6 more plus the Creed movies. So I was like, now I get it.
Yeah. I mean, I was so hyped you picked this because I was looking through our list, and I think of all the films we've covered so far, this is probably the most tied into our fabric as Americans and like American culture and just the mythology, the makeup. So just to look at this, it's like to watch this movie and to pull it apart is really to be like, okay, let's do it. Let's do the text work on like who the fuck we are and like what we're carrying around. And I think it's very real. Like what I love about it is a very complex watch where you can see all the shit that's like fucked up about what it says about us, what the mythology we carry, the cultural baggage, the racism, the sexism, and yet I have the same experience. I'm like, I am Rocky. Like it's impossible to not watch it. And I know so many people who feel that way. And it's usually like more so than like white men. It's usually not. Like I know like a lot of women are like, I am fucking Rocky. Like, let's go. So I think it's a phenomenal choice for that reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild how much of a not sports movie it is too.
Yeah, right? Like halfway through is when he gets the call. Like we were marking it and we were like, wait, this has been a love story so far for the entire first hour. The boxing scene at the end is 12 minutes long. There's like one boxing scene in the beginning.
There's only 2 fights.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly Stallone was like, I am a writer. I'm writing this piece. You can feel this as an actor who's coming up with Strasberg and with all of these just actors. Like, it's just such a like, I'm an actor who's writing an actor's piece. It's so ingrained in it. And, you know, definitely was like, I'm going to make sure this has a character arc. This is like not meant to be, like you said, a sports film. It's going to be tied to this love story. It's going to be tied to the heart of it. And I think that's why it captures us in that way. But so there's like 2 things I would love to talk about. There's the mythology that like the film brings, but then like the mythology of Stallone and the making of this.
Oh yeah.
Which starts with Stallone having seen the real fight between Muhammad Ali and
Chuck Wepner,
Yes. And I saw for the first time in doing research like the actual clips from the fight, and it's remarkable how, because I think later on Chuck Wepner tried to
sue him.
You did.
Or there was so they tried to like distance a little bit of like how much, but you watch the clips of that fight between him and Ali and you're like, that's the genesis of this. So it is pretty amazing to think, oh, he saw this, but then as an actor would, which is like the dorky out, like, you know, the nerdy actor side of me is like, he saw it and was like, but what's going on inside? And like fleshed out basically the whole internal workings that like got to that moment for Rocky. It's great storytelling. And I think the script is like 70, it's like the 78th best script on like the Writers Guild.
my
Some
gosh,
lists they
I
have.
believe that.
So it's
Yeah, and the thing about the rags to riches story that Rocky has is Stallone had the exact same one. I think that's what's so resonant about
if
it, right?
you watch the
Mhm.
series, each of the movies is very clearly where he's at. The second movie talks a lot about like, oh, how do I deal with like fame and people asking me to do stuff? And the
Yeah.
third one is about, oh, I'm rich and successful, so am I too lazy and not really in the game? Like he really, like all you're saying
Yeah.
about all of the actor stuff
He
is
did it
super
all.
in there, which is again like it's the great paradox of all of the stuff.
Yeah, and he was literally like in a crappy apartment, struggling actor. He actually did a porn where he was named the Italian Stallion. So that's where he was
That's
at
right.
in his
Yep.
career.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so this
Earned
was
that name legitimately.
he really did.
He deserves
Yeah,
it.
there you go.
The other really smart thing he does in the screenplay construction, and I think the reason why so many people relate to Rocky as an underdog is because Rocky's economic conditions are front and center, not only in the setting of Rocky's life, but in how like the conflict in the early part of the movie plays out between like we see him like he has to like his side hustle is being a mob enforcer, which he doesn't want to do. And we see how being like a boxer near the end of his, maybe not the end of his career, but like the middling part of his career, how that is having like an economic impact on him. So you're feeling that struggle. You're like watching a person, you're like, man, I hope this guy can fucking make rent. So I think that's another layer, along with all the actory stuff, along with all the character stuff, that like just makes Rocky such a tangible lead character in a movie. It's a lot like how in Alien, we did Alien on the podcast. We're just like they're constantly just talking about how they want to make more money from their job. And how they're getting fucked by the company, and like just like rooting it in a little bit of that like material reality for these workers, because he's a worker, he as a boxer, I think does like so much work to get you on his side as a protagonist.
Oh yeah, the part where they're showing him
Yeah.
like he gets his pay, and then they are like, oh, but minus this part and the gym fee and these things. You're really going
Yes.
home with like $10.
Exactly.
So let's get into this like mythology that is set up, because as much as I lean into it, I was also like, okay, but let's be critical of it. Like, let's remember there's something even with Stallone's mythology, because watching his interviews, you start to realize like, I actually don't know how much of this is true, and how much, as he repeats the story, I noticed in some interviews, like it changes a little. Like there's a story that's intentionally starting to be told. Not that those circumstances weren't real, but like, what is the intention of selling us this story? Because I'm hook, line, and sinker in like an actor who made their own way despite the odds. I actually heard him say in an interview, he starts to talk about his poverty in the sense of like, I got it down to a science. If I sell this script, because they offered him all this money to take the script so that he wouldn't act in it. But the deal he makes is like, you know, if it makes it really big and I sell the script and I'm not in it, like that's the worst, which we can all relate to. There's something bigger, but what he has to give up materially to make that happen is being sold to us as like, at least the way I interpret it and internalized it, is like, that's it. That's the good thing. I'll figure out how to manage my poverty, as he says, in order to make myself smaller and smaller, because capitalism promises me at the end of the day a bigger reward if I do so. And I think that mythology that he mirrors so much in these interviews is exactly the mythology of Rocky, which I also very much internalized. Another thing he talks about is, what did he say in this interview, where he was saying, sure, any other of these movie stars could have done it for like, they would have given him so much more money, but I could do it for cheaper. I'll work harder, you know, I'll make sure that I'm working less. And you're just like, that is why this mythology is so useful to capitalism, because it can get us all saying, hey, put me in, coach. I can do it. I don't need that much money. I know how to eat raw eggs. I don't even need to cook my eggs. I'll sit in my apartment, which was something that Stallone actually did and then made it into the film, right? And now we kind of glamorize a little bit like, well, that's great for bodybuilding, and we get really excited when he chugs the raw eggs. But at the heart of it, you're like, you're doing that because you're like, I'll make myself smaller and smaller so that I can use this as like a good thing because I don't need as much shit as those other movie stars. And I don't know. I was excited to bring that up with you both because I think that for the, you know, the mythology of the starving artist and what we need to do to make ourselves a viable commodity in this market is so harmful. And I've had to do so much work to get out of that and say like, okay, wait a minute. There's got to be other ways than like the Stallone, which we know there's only going to be one person who makes it. Because what happens to all the other Stallones who are still there drinking raw eggs with no retirement plan in rooms like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the wild thing about it. While you do feel so emotionally connected, this is a story of individual exceptionalism. This is a story of being humble, being the starving
Yes.
artist, and waiting for somebody to amazingly pluck you from obscurity. He didn't even do anything proactive to get those. He didn't work on those working his skills. It was just like, please just, don't rock the boat, be the guy, do the thing. And then, yeah, someone will come to you.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. And what's really interesting, just especially working with artists and especially working in a capitalist system, the starving artist narrative is necessary for capitalism to thrive and for art to be commodified, right? You have to say, hey, if you just
Yeah.
keep your head down, someone is going to decide. You don't have any control over who decides. Someone's going to decide that you're worth it, you're worthy.
You got to pay dues even though you're not in a
Yeah.
union.
And then you will be the one that's plucked and becoming a
Mhm.
millionaire. You're going to be the one that's going to be the star,
And
right?
it's because you didn't rock the boat.
Yep.
I remember being in just inside baseball type of stuff. Sorry, sports movie stuff. I was at a forum of theater folks, and I was rabble rousing as I do about race, and I had someone pull me aside and was like, "Look, I can get you a role on Broadway tomorrow. I can get this. We can make this happen. Just stop doing this, and we can put you on the path to where you want to be if you would stop trying to rock the boat. But the reason you're not getting put into these places because you're rocking this boat."
Yeah. And there is this need for like you to feel like you're all alone. That's something that we talk about a lot when it comes to money and when it comes to why the system wants you to make it feel like, oh, you have to do this by yourself. Bootstraps, hyper individualism, the American dream is rags to riches, like basing it all on, hey, you don't need anyone else, right? The nuclear family, there's so many things that capitalism has done to say, you don't need community, you just need money, right? You don't need all of these other things around you.
Mhm.
You just need wealth. And that's what it rides on. And I think that especially when artists, the only path they see to being able to put food on the table is to make it big, that you're either one or the other. You're starving or you're famous.
Yeah, and then you feed the capitalism machine no matter what. You do the thing they want. You make as a musician, I was incentivized to make jingles or to make songs for the club or things that were not the things I was trying to promote.
Yeah. And I feel like that with Rocky and Stallone's story in general, and I got to go back and watch those interviews because I think it's really interesting to hear that he changed his story so much because he was spinning his own Cinderella story, right? As this actor. And then Rocky was doing the same thing, like rewatching the movie and being like, he only trained for 5 weeks. So he beat the crap out of the heavyweight champion because he had more heart.
He had heart.
Like what?
Well, that's again really good individualism stuff. There's this idea that being individualist is practical and real, and being collectivist is magic. But every time
Right.
you see art being made, the individualism is literally magic. There is no practical path to being that. He just has heart. And when you think about the way that this affects everything, not to open up too much of a can of worms, John Avildsen also directed The Karate Kid. And between Rocky and The Karate Kid, that's how
Oh.
every sports movie has been guided and directed ever since.
Sure.
Wow.
That's a really good point. Like, let's not all lay all of the laurels at Stallone's feet. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of people worked on this movie. A lot of people, I'm sure, helped him. I'm sure he had a lot of friends who read drafts or, like gave him notes or whatever. It's not, like you're saying, it is not just like the efforts of one person. And that myth is so harmful. And I know like Rivka and I have talked about this because we both like, me less so these days. Rivka's still like in the like acting theater world. I am no longer. But when I was, and I was also writing, I was like in LA trying to get staffed on a TV show was my big goal. And it was just all I saw around me was either like you either completely sacrifice all of your mental health, your time, your energy, your well-being just to like keep grinding, and you maybe get your shot or get your break that way, or you're someone's famous's kid, and like that that's the other route, and both routes infuriated me. And by the time I like left LA, I was like, I hate this so much and I'm so miserable, and like now I hate making art for these reasons. And it was only after learning about how the system commodifies art that I actually started to like to heal. And I was like, oh, it wasn't me. It was like all of it's the system like we're talking about.
Yeah.
But good for Stallone,
Well, I think what's interesting in this first movie, though, is like, and to be clear, I didn't find any like major changes in his interviews, but it was like little things, that you would maybe be with if you're with someone over a period of time and you're like, huh, that's weird. You didn't tell it quite like that before. And you can just feel it building. You know what I mean? Like the story being weaved with purpose. And people, I guess that goes to the Oscar thing of like that you're like, it caught on and there was a value, there was like a very clear cultural value to this story happening at this time. He even spoke in some of the interviews about wanting to make this movie because, a lot of the movies that were coming out in the 70s, and it was like a big boom for all these like gritty indie films that were actually very critical of government and critical of culture and counterculture and critical of society. And he wanted to make a movie that was feel good and kind of back into this American spirit. And he takes this working class character, but really does this interesting thing where it becomes very reactionary. The sex politics are very reactionary, very conservative. So you have what on the outside looks like this working class hero, but underneath there's what's going to bubble us into eventually like a very conservative 1980s period. And it's happening here, and he's doing it somewhat intentionally. He didn't want cursing in the movie. He didn't need it. So it's like, it's gritty, but it's not Taxi Driver. It's not Network.
Okay, it's not cussing necessarily, but there are several slurs that are casually thrown in there.
Oh, absolutely. Which is interesting as well for him to say, for him to say there's no cursing. And you're like, but you say lots of horrible stuff, but there's no cursing. Like, again, the differentiation is intentional and clear. And then to see that like this wins over those two movies that were much more critical of society, I just think says everything we need to know about it.
I really like what y'all are saying about the time period. This time period is such in a state of flux, both creatively and in terms of the world. I mean, in the 1970s is post-civil rights. We're trying to figure out what's going on there. And like you said about the art, there is a lot of art that's critical, but also Jaws, Star Wars, Rocky. I think these are three of the big tent poles of what made 80s and what cinema became. And your Taxi Drivers and your Networks, which if y'all did Network, y'all should do Bamboozled, the sister film to that one, another great John. But like those were part of the older world where you could be more critical, and it wasn't such a machine. They were figuring out the machine in real time, and that's why there's so much like good art to it, but also the little insidious stuff going on. Yeah, Rocky is an underdog, but he's a white underdog. And yeah, he's in blue collar Philly, but it's such a white Philly that even the trash can singing doo-wop band is mostly white.
There are no poor black people in Philly somehow in Rocky's movie, right?
Well, there's this great thing that they do. Well, not great thing, but this interesting thing where it's both post-civil rights. So people want to, claw things back for white folks, but also we realize that we need to respect Black people and we should treat them nicer. So there's this weird thing that I don't think was necessarily intentional, where Rocky is this poor white guy amongst a number of poor white people, and almost every non-white person he meets is a higher status than him. There's Apollo Creed, who comes from wealth. I went and looked up. They said he was like grew up middle class, and he's all perfect and's got all this money. The news reporter who interviews him is Black. The successful boxers who can afford to have a locker and who are there with him are Black. And I know that a lot of that is he's not trying to create a Black adversary. He's like, oh, we should have more Black people in the background because we don't want to be racist. But at the same time, showing that while showing Rocky's story creates this really stark adversarial place where the Black people are the powerful, rich, talented ones who are taking everything away, and the white guy is the hard scrabble real American.
Yeah. And he's like just the main character energy, right? Like that's something that when I was watching this, I was like, oh, Rocky is not smart, not talented, doesn't have money, and we're rooting for him.
No,
he's like,
that's white supremacy.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes white supremacy is a misnomer of a term, because it's like, not that we are the best, it's that we're the default, and we've got heart.
This is
so
it.
Despite your physical abilities, despite your intellectual abilities, all that stuff, we're still gonna supersede everything.
Wow.
Yeah, we're still your protagonist, you know, like where it starts here. And you said he's not trying to create a black adversary, but he quite literally created like the black adversary in Apollo Creed. And doesn't, like we're saying, doesn't do him or the film's depiction or discussion of him any favors. Like when he's at the bar and the bartender says like a racial slur, Rocky doesn't correct him. Rocky's just like, oh, okay, yeah. And then like when they get to the match, Apollo is, I think, like it seems to be like purposefully mocking Uncle Sam and America, like in his outfit and the way that he's sort of like, you know, showboating on stage and everything. I very, very much read it as like, oh, look at this dude, look at this black boxer who's maybe like punched above his own station now and has reached this level of success. And look at him mocking like American tradition and Uncle Sam. So we have to have this like working class white guy come in and just like knock the shit out of him. Like that felt like below the surface, but also very much on the surface for me in like watching this for the first time.
That's so wild that you say that. You know, the bartender and the slur, I actually felt like for that time period, he did read him the riot act. He didn't address the slur because you weren't going to address the slur, but he said that he wasn't a clown. And I think the term clown has a very real significance, because Apollo Creed is amazing. He is this ineffable person who is absolutely perfect. He does everything he can for America, and yet he's still a clown. That thing you're saying about reading him, about being George Washington, it felt very sincere to me. It felt like he was, I am so successful, I'm an unstoppable champion, but I'm begging America to love me. I'm being George Washington. I'm wearing the shorts. Like, please. And they're still like, you're a clown. We hate you.
Yeah, I felt like it was so interesting watching this movie now, because there's so much of those tensions reflected then that I'm like, this feels like it could be today, with the feelings of like a working class who's like, you know, the problem is diversity and inclusion, and that's the problem. It's DEI, it's all this stuff. And it feels like that same tension, like even though it's not said, it's the locker, right? Why are you giving my locker away? I've been here 6 years.
Yeah, and to a black box.
That to me felt like, oh, this felt like, you know, I'm sorry, if Trump was around, you're like, Rocky's voting for Trump
100%.
because Trump has the rhetoric
1,000,000%. Yep.
ready for someone who feels like, why the fuck is my locker gone? And I think I hear you on the Uncle Sam thing, because I felt like the one giveaway for me was like the line that like, oh, he thought this was a fight. This is a show. That it wasn't necessarily racial, but it was clear that Creed was in the capitalist class, was working with the capitalist class, the show, right? That he was bought in on that, and that there was something insincere about that we as an audience were supposed to be aware of. That there's the fight and there's the show, and Rocky still has the heart and the fight. And so inherently we're like, that's the adversary. There's something about that showman that we don't trust, even if the acting felt like sincere and wanting to like get people on the side. And it was a class issue, right? Like it became predominantly a class issue. Yeah, I think what was fascinating about this one, Rocky 1, is that it felt to me like, watching it through the lens of politics, you're watching this character of Rocky. Like, I was like, there's so many opportunities where you could radicalize this person. My favorite scene, and I think my favorite metaphor, is in the icebox. The scene where Rocky first goes into the icebox to see Paulie with the slabs of meat hanging. I'm like, what a better like visual for what life under capitalism is like. Just these slabs of meat. And this is the subtlety of the writing and the brilliance of the acting too. He says, it stinks in here, you know? And he's obsessed. He said this the last time when the trainer came to his house, Mickey, to beg him to manage him. And he's like, what? It stinks in here. You didn't want to come. So it's this idea of feeling the shame of the stench that is clearly related to class. He goes into this icebox and he's like, it stinks in here. And he says, you kill all these? Who killed all these things? And no one ever answers him.
And that gave me chills. No one ever fucking answers him. And he keeps, as an actor, looking at the meat. But because there's not an answer, capitalism answers him. And I just felt like that was such a resounding like lesson for those of us who want to organize for a better horizon, for revolution, for communism, socialism, anti-capitalism, is like, we need to organize so that someone can be there to give the answer to who killed all these. Because no one does, that to me is the pivot moment where Rocky turns and starts beating it. And he leaves that icebox, and Paulie is left there to take a swig of alcohol. And so we leave watching him decide to become this sort of like illusion of hope. But Paulie, who I feel like represents the rest of the working class, is just left to drink. And we know the material circumstances for the most people are just, you know, it's again that vagueness, like we'll just drink through it. But I loved that scene. I was like, that is the moment. If anyone was going to step in and fucking change the course of Rocky, it was in that icebox. But often so many people are siloed, and capitalism is just so much more fucking organized than we are yet. You know, we see it, and that's why organizing is so important for these movements to be able to come in and answer that.
One thing you said that is really important to us is art changes the world. It does change the world. It changes the narrative. It makes everything what it is. And the reason why we know that is because it has done so in a negative fashion. Art has shaped the world that we see in so many harmful and deleterious ways. And I say this, and a lot of time artists get upset with me because they're like, wait, but we love and respect art. And yeah, I do love and respect art too. But I think it's really important to see the ways it has shaped it, because if we're really going to change that thing, we need to see what they've done and reverse engineer on our own tip.
Yeah. Damn.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I feel, damn, Rivka also. I'm like, oh, this is why I love the show. I'm like, all your insights. I'm like, yes, I've seen this movie several times. And I'm like, the meat, that scene, because that scene is so gross to me. I watch it every time and I'm like, oh my God, are they going to sell that meat to someone after this? Like, that's disgusting, right? And it's just so bloody. And then when he does it for the reporting, he just holds his hands up and doesn't say a word, right? And he's just like, this is it. This is it. Come and get me, you know? There's like that sense of, oh my God, he has turned this corner. There is that pivot of like, I'm here to fight. Whatever it is, I'm here to fight. You know?
Yeah, when you say that too, it makes me think of the sports movie of it all. You remember that this is also at the same time that Magic Johnson and Larry Bird were in college. They were college rivals around this time. I think Magic got drafted in 1980. And this was a similar Great White Hope story. I know we haven't talked a lot about the Great White Hope thing, but you know, that's like in the bones of Rocky. It's in Chuck Wepner's story. And that was how basketball got popular, was this soft-spoken, humble, from a small town guy that's how they saw Larry Bird, versus this flashy, shiny LA guy.
His name was Magic.
Whose name is literally Magic. And, you know, they created that kind of contrast. And it feels very similar to the way that they contrast Apollo and Rocky.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think it's so fascinating that Philadelphia's biggest sports hero is fictional. And like this fantasy.
Joe Frazier's in the movie.
He's in the movie.
Joe Frazier has the gym, the real boxing gym. They finally gave him a statue after he died, but like Joe Frazier's in the movie.
Yeah.
He's a star.
He's a cameo. It's so wild. And to be like, oh, this guy made a statue for the movie, and Philadelphia was like, yeah, put it in the city. People I wanted to go see the Rocky statue after this movie.
You got to remember who Philly sports heroes are. You know, when you think of people like, there's like Charles Barkley or Allen Iverson, they're all thought of as villainous people. Even the great born in Philly, played for Philly, Wilt Chamberlain once famously said, nobody ever roots for Goliath. And that's how these folks are seen. And that's, you know, part of the whole hard scrabble, I'm a rough, tough fighting person in Philly, because that's Philly. Philly is a tough, violent place. One of my favorite rap songs ever was there's this song called Security, and it was, hey, rappers from out of town, when you come to Philly, if we don't like your song, we're gonna beat you up and rob you. Also, if we do like your song, we're probably still going to beat you up and rob you. So you better bring security. And that's just so indicative of how Philly is. We're so angry. We're always like, it's like ready to pop at any moment. And that just sits there in all of the Rocky stuff. It's, you see it in him. He's seething.
Mm-hmm.
He's so stressed. He's so tired of all, wants to break out. When you talk
Yeah.
about the Clash consciousness stuff, there is such a moment for it. And I think what happens is, again, like the beginning of the sports movies will solve racism stuff. He and Apollo have this beautiful moment in the ring where the story in the ring is so great to me that they tell a great 12-minute story. It's so funny that they get Hulk Hogan later because it's such like a pro wrestling, like we're telling the story in the ring, and it's this bromance where these guys learn to love and respect each other for the craft of what they're doing in this space, and they build a romance kind of similar to Adrian's in this short span that kind of is supposed to, when they end up fighting the Russians later and all that kind of stuff. It's the seed of it. But instead of getting radicalized to change the world, he gets radicalized to be like, oh, I could be part of this neoliberal, semi-capitalist thing that sports does for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I wrote it in the synopsis, and like, not even a joke. It's a line from the movie. Rocky keeps saying, I need to prove to the neighborhood that I'm not a bum. There's this like constant refrain that we hear so much in our system, especially from people who don't understand how the system oppresses us, of like grasping for these moments or these things, these awards, this wealth that'll come to you either through your job or through your schooling or whatever, that are like, I need these indicators, these external indicators to prove to myself that I have value as a person, that I like have inherent value, because everything, my entire lived experience and the way that like this system prioritizes and values wealth and celebrity and fame and all of that bullshit over just like being a good human, everything is telling me that I'm worthless. So like, if I don't go 15 rounds with Apollo, I will know that I am actually a bum. And if I do, then my entire life will suddenly have found validation and justification. And that it's just like
heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking. And like, it feeds into this myth. It feeds into like this rags to riches underdog story that we're talking about. But it's such a harmful and dangerous narrative to tell yourself that like, if I don't get this one thing, then I'm basically a fucking useless person. And like, the movie kind of reinforces that.
Yeah, no, it really does.
I was saying, stop quoting my intrusive thoughts, man. Like, what? That's, yeah.
One of the things that we actively tell people all the time is your net worth does not equal your self-worth. And I think we let people sit with that, and people are like, oh, okay. And they hear it and they're like, yes, I agree. And then also the work that it takes to actually internalize that, when everything else is telling you, when you look at your bank account, when you look at how wealth is glorified, when you look at what's prioritized, when you look at productivity and capitalism, all of these things, and someone tells you like, this is your shot to make it big. This is your shot to be worth something. And you put all of those eggs in that basket, like,
or all of that mom spaghetti.
All the mom spaghetti. Oh my God, there you go. It doesn't even have to be a sports movie, right?
But I don't know, and talk about like Rocky. It made so many other imitators in every genre. 8 Mile is straight up Rocky.
Yeah,
and is even less true.
Right.
That's
right.
It's so wild.
Eminem in real life lost that battle.
Yeah.
Oh,
Talk
really?
about mythology.
Oh yeah. I mean, hey, Eminem
Okay.
was a great rapper and all
Wow.
that, but he is not a freestyle indie MC, and he was like a known commodity who came into the scene. And a great MC named Juice, who because he wrote a lot of Kanye songs, just like took him to the woodshed.
Oh, damn.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah, this mythology thing, it's so fascinating because there's so much of it all the time. I think even the fact that you had alluded to this before, but like the timeline, if you pay any kind of attention, you're like, wait a fucking minute. You're telling me he couldn't breathe walking up those steps? And then but we'll go pursue that. I was like ready to be like, you know what? I can fucking get it. I can do that in a month. Like, we're just so at the quick to like get there with that stuff. And I also think Stallone, again, because they created this mythology after, but the original story was darker. Like, I feel like he had it in him, actually. I feel like this movie sort of had two ways to go, and it eventually was pushed in this direction of just embracing this mythology, this sort of white supremacy that it like leads, again, like the choice of like, it could be it's like, why were voters in
2016 gonna vote for Bernie over Trump? Like, why does that make any sense? And you're like, for these reasons that we're talking about, that there's like a deep need for an alternative to capitalism, but if something isn't there to fill it, it's gonna be this scarier path. It's why lesser of two evils will never fucking work. Like, it's just not gonna help us here. But I think there was an original ending that was darker. I mean, I'm curious your thoughts on like ending with Adrian, and I think that wanted to follow a path of like, if the movie ended there and there was no other movies to follow, that actually would have a much different, like if this was the only movie and we knew other shit didn't go down and he just didn't pursue anything after, it's such a different mythology. You're like, so he didn't win. It was fine. He found love. And then what happens? You know, it just like changes everything.
Yeah, that's the wild thing about Stallone and his whole career, bringing it back to him, because that was First Blood also. First Blood is not Rambo. They're very different things. And Rocky and Rambo, his two big things. And I agree with you where he's like, I'm a writer, I'm an actor. As he got, big and blew up, he didn't want to be Arnold, who was seen as a non-actor, who was just a star. He wanted to be respected in this actor. And you saw him go away from the Rocky and Rambo. And then in the 2000s, he was like, no one cares. So I'm just going to go back to this world that I've stumbled into that started out as a very artsy kind of place and ended up being so amazingly jingoistic. And he, like Rocky and like Rambo, just keeps following on with the thing that is offered to them, like many of us artists do. How many musicians have made a song about something they don't believe in because you came into the studio and everybody respected was already done, and you were like, well, I guess I'll do something about that subject matter, and then you're there. It's so easy to get swept up in it, and I think both Stallone and his characters get swept up.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think too, we were talking about sequels in the car, and one of the questions I asked Dyalekt was, I was like, how many sequels would actually have gotten made if it wasn't for capitalism? Like, if it wasn't for like, oh, this movie made a bunch of money, so let's make Home Alone 2. Right? Rocky won the Oscar, made a ton of money, so let's find out what happens next. When, like, do you really need to?
I mean, that ending is really good.
It's perfect.
And talk about the capitalism of it all.
It's really good.
There's these two people loving each other while in the background you see Creed being excited that he won, right? He's focused on the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's talk about the sex politics because now that we're talking about the love.
Yes.
That's the other big.
Oh my God.
It's the other big part of this movie. I was just going to say, as the straight white guy, I will start on the sex politics. No, I'm partially joking, but no, they're not great. They're really not great in this movie. I was really shocked because, like, we especially with huge movies like this from the past, they get recontextualized as we move to the future. People start to realize things about them that were not fucking okay, and I'm sure people knew at the time, but it just wasn't widely discussed or accepted by I don't know, the men in society. But the thing that jumped out to me, I mean, like, his date with Adrian is absolutely like, it was terrible. Like, by the end of it, I was afraid for her. I was very afraid for her.
Yes.
No, legitimately, I was like, dude, stop. Like, you're cornering her. Stop it. Fucking stop. Get away from her. Get away from this woman. What are you doing?
Yep.
And it's played for in that classic, just like, sometimes it's really cool and romantic if a guy just physically overwhelms a woman in a movie, and that's the way that he's gonna get her to decide that actually I do like this guy and I'm going to give him a kiss because he's gigantic and literally has pinned me into a corner. Massive.
A boxer.
Yeah, that was it.
Terrifying. Yeah, I mean, the way that she said, I don't want to come in, I have to go home. Like, it was very firm. And he was like, no, come on. The 3 no's to a yes is just like, it's so common. And just seeing it here, I was like, oh yeah, that's it. That's this time. I wanted to bring up.
No, go ahead.
No, because whenever we see this happen in a movie, Dyalekt is like, yeah, that's how we were taught as guys. We were taught that if you just ask enough, even if they say no, eventually they'll say yes. And they were also taught that if you're direct, then a girl's not going to like that, right? If you're too direct,
and the thing of it is he did this stuff that, Rocky is all about plausible deniability of the, like, systemic bad stuff happening. And that's with the sexism stuff, because it's like, look, he's leaning into her, but he's not forcing her. And he's always nice to her. And she's just very shy, and he's pulling it out of her. And, even as a kid, I remember being like, does she like him? what the heck is going on here? But there's plausible deniability of, oh, he's just shy and he's charismatic, so he's breaking her out of her shell. And she eventually becomes, Talia Shire does a great job. She eventually becomes this powerful character in the sequels. So like that gets washed away and you forget about it.
Yeah. I think the fact that she is shy is a huge reason why you can just say, okay, he was just he could tell she was shy. And you couldn't tell as an audience member if she liked it or not, or if she wanted it. And maybe she was just didn't know how to speak or use her voice, and he helped her find it, you know?
And the contrast with Polly, like her brother is this abusive monster. So by comparison, like Rocky's a sweetheart.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're like, oh, maybe that's why Talia
Right.
didn't want to go in, you know?
Yeah, maybe that's why she's so quiet and so shy, because her brother always acts like that. It's all these like layers that are plausible.
Polly.
No, totally. It was really upsetting. I agree with you that date scene. I was just like, I'm so upset and disturbed. Partially, I think because of what you're saying. I think we all know. I'm like, this is what this makes so much sense. This is what masculinity was taught as for for so many generations and reaffirmed, particularly in this movie. And again, similar to race, I think the sex here is like, I think it's intentional. I think it's a reaction. I think it's very reactionary to this period of time where there was a huge women's liberation movement. It's seething with passive aggression. He wrote these characters, and it was even creepier to watch him in one of these interviews talk about that love scene. He talks particularly about the date scene, and watching Stallone talk about that scene gave me the heebie-jeebies because he's just watching. I'm like, the exact moment you're talking about when he takes her glasses off and goes in for the kiss, and he's talking about Talia Shire's performance, which is great, but he's talking about that moment of like, and you see her shift from just becoming a really, this is like the perfect virgin whore dichotomy. What he's really talking about is her going from the virgin to the whore in that moment, right? Making that switch to wanting him and finding her desire. But I was like, I'm seeing what the fuck are you seeing, dude? Like, I don't see that at all. All I see is like a nothing face that looks like I didn't want to come into this house. Now I'm here and you've taken my glasses off. That's all I'm seeing. And then he's like, yeah, that was one of the most loving scenes I've ever shot. The whole like sliding down. And I was like,
God.
That is so sad and shocking. But again, that is the psychology. Like but I truly did believe when he's saying that, I'm like, I think you really see that. And that's so scary. It's how brainwashed people get to, like, there's such a lack of empathy or ability to see her there.
Sly's actual most loving scene was cyber sex with Sandra Bullock. Right? That's just
When was
Demolition Man.
Demolition Man.
I was like, how many loving scenes has Sly even made? I was just
Oh my God, Demolition Man.
Tangle and Cash.
Yeah.
Him and Kurt Russell.
That's another one I've never seen.
Oh,
I guess I have a
Wow.
lot to catch up with Sly.
A Sylvester Stallone blind spot for you there, Frank.
well, I mean, if you want to go, my favorite non Big Two Sly movie is Over the Top, which is arm wrestling Rocky. But it's not. It's similar to Rocky. It's not actually about arm wrestling. Like barely any arm wrestling happens. It's about this sad trucker trying to reconnect with his estranged son.
And he won an arm wrestling championship to reconnect with his son. That was it. That's the whole thing.
To do it,
That's it. You know.
I mean that the A to B on that totally makes sense.
Okay. Now his son loves him. No, but it is. Oh my gosh, it's so wild because as someone who was very shy growing up, I very much identified with Adrian. And I did like the idea of like being pursued, right? Like there was no question that he was into her, but like watching that scene again and being like, wow, he really, like, every time we watch it, we just watched it and I was like, wow, he really does corner her, doesn't he? Like he backs her into a corner. He takes off his sweater when he first walks in. So there's already those implications. And part of me as someone who grew up shy was like, oh, I thought that I wanted that. But now watching it and being like, that is actually terrifying. I don't want that. I don't want someone to be that aggressive.
Yeah, terrifying.
I think there's there's a truth that like she's shy, but it almost is used. It's all the other signalers in the film, right? The amount that he talks about virginity, right? As like she's ruined as soon as she has sex with Rocky. Like the world is set up very reactionary. The counselor, like what did you call it, Frank? To the neighborhood guidance counselor talk about like being a whore. We're told all of these things even before we get his meeting and his mating with Adrian. So that to me is like the underwriting context where I really think, like, I think there's a world in which you can be dominant and submissive and it can be totally consensual and playful, but like the context in which all of this is happening is so clear that the ideology is being filtered through women or possessions. I don't give a, like, what really disturbs me is, like, he doesn't give a fuck about her. He doesn't know about her. He doesn't ask any questions. He's an egomaniac who just talks at her.
He does not shut up.
Does not shut the
fuck up
the whole time. Yeah, we just noticed that too.
Totally. And but I just thought all of the language was there to be like, okay, so women here are virgins whose shyness in this ideology is part of like their docile behavior. And it's a good thing she doesn't know how pretty she is. Otherwise, she would be too sexual, otherwise. And so then I take her glasses off and now we have the problem of like, you better be my girl. You better say, like, for her character arc, really, it's like her saying I love you at the end is sort of like, good, you can be a married woman potentially now and not live in sin, and there's all the Catholics, there's all the like religious stuff. So that all felt very intentional. Again, like coming into the 80s and being like, yeah, fuck you, women's lib. It just felt very like, fuck you, women to me. Yeah. With the heart of gold.
I mean, it's not as surprising that like an East Coast Italian has like pretty like Roman Catholic based, sexual values. So like that, like none of this is surprising to me. Like that's something I would hear from a lot of family members of just like, slut shaming and
sure.
It's like, did you hear about this? Did you hear about so and so's daughter? Did you hear about what she's been up to? Like that, like all the fucking time. So it does not surprise me that like Stallone, as the author of this film, had some of those values in sex politics like bleed into Rocky, into the way he interacts with every female character in this movie.
We were talking about it earlier, just to recap, when you're talking about the lady who he was lecturing, the little young lady who's lecturing, who in Rocky Balboa, the 6th movie where Adrian dies off screen, he ends up that young lady and is now an adult and a single mom with a biracial kid that's played for confusion, but she sort of becomes Rocky's love interest. And even weirder, I found out a draft. I saw this YouTube about Rocky 5, which is like the most hated one. And there's a draft where that little girl, he sees her again in Rocky 5, except now she's homeless. So as you talk about like women being like possessions and props.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Jesus.
Wow.
You should have listened to me.
Yeah, you should have listened to me.
That is so...
You should have listened to I give you such a good speech when you were a little girl. You should just listen.
And now date me. Like, what?
Oh, that's... not surprising.
Yeah. The other one from this time is Saturday Night Fever, which I'm dying to cover on this podcast. We'll get to. But that one, like seeing that blew my mind.
Yeah.
But it's very much like, this feeling of this time is just, it's so passive aggressive.
I did love when she says "screw you, creepo" to him. I was like, that's the correct response.
Yeah.
That is the 100% correct response to what this man just said to you.
Yeah. And he's like, yeah, me? I guess I am a creep. Who am I?
Yeah.
Oh my.
Oh, that's so classic. Oh, you're right. Fine. The whole like, yeah, I'm just a regular guy trying to help the neighborhood and they don't even appreciate it, right?
Well, he's also a little bit of a white magical character where he's like, I'm not smart, but I'm here to dispense,
wisdom.
Very slang-filled wisdom. Another like racial wild thing. You notice how the white characters, for the most part, him and Paulie, all that, they're super slangy. Every word is slangy.
The accents.
The accents. And every single black character, again, this is what I'm saying about them, like also trying to be equitable
and respectful in some way.
Yes, respectful more than equitable. Apollo Creed is speaking nearly the Queen's English, and every other black character is very well articulated. But it's these white guys who are these, hard scrabble, just trying here.
Yeah. I also think Apollo Creed is so fascinating to me. Just watching what he has to do and the code switching that he does and like the role model persona that he's taken on. Like the very first scene that you see with Apollo Creed is on TV saying, become a doctor, become a lawyer, don't become a sports person. Yeah, we're grunts, right?
Yeah, get a leather briefcase.
Be a thinker, not a stinker. He says all of these things to be this role model also to these kids. And all they can say is he's a clown, And I think it's the perfection that black athletes have to have, like that Creed had to have, along with his heavyweight title, where he couldn't necessarily be himself, was really interesting to watch too, and like view through that lens of like, it is technically post civil rights, but they still have to put on a show. He has to put on a show constantly.
Well, again, the 70s were where the reaction to civil rights stuff happened. If we're talking about like real life stuff, this is where a lot of legislation was put in to make it harder for social services. This is where companies started. There's this great book, Land of the Free, by this guy, Devin Fergus, where he writes about how in the 1970s, people created more difficult contracts and they started putting a lot of hidden fees in different industries to make it harder for people to change their station.
Yeah. And then the 70s were also the late 70s was the Great Divergence. So that is for the first time when the wage gap and the income gap was significant, where wages were not keeping up with profits for the first time at the end of the 70s. And then the narrative you hear is, oh, they're taking your jobs, right? It's not, oh, the wealthy are keeping more of their wealth.
Taking your locker.
Yep, taking your locker. That guy over there is taking your stuff.
Wow, that's so fascinating. Well, another kind of mirror that happens in the real life Sylvester Stallone story is Carl Weathers, who plays Apollo Creed. When he came into audition, apparently was auditioning with Rocky, was really throwing punches, was auditioning with Sylvester Stallone, really throwing punches, didn't realize that Stallone was he thought he was just the reader. He's like, I could do a lot better if you had a real actor reading opposite me, which is kind of a great mythology of and Stallone's like, that's perfect. Like it was like the perfect energy. But I also think so again, it almost feels too perfectly mirrored the real story. It's a great actor audition room tale. But I also like the idea that he probably was Stallone's great in this movie, but I haven't seen other roles that he's been so perfect for. I could imagine.
Well, and Carl Weathers is amazing.
He's
can we
yes. That's exactly what I was just gonna say.
What? How was Carl Weathers not the big 80s star alongside all of those guys? He had supernaturally good chemistry with both Sly and Arnold, made classics with them, and the only star vehicle they gave him was the woefully underpushed Action Jackson. He was smart, talented, good looking, could fit into all these different kind of roles, and yet he was a B+C action player throughout the 80s. It's so parallel with the character of Apollo.
Yeah, I was gonna say all that. Carl Weathers, Stallone is very, very good in this, but I honestly walked away being I think Carl Weathers was better in this movie, acting wise. Carl Weathers is so fucking good. I just watched Predator for the first time ever, and I was like, oh, this movie doesn't work without obviously Arnold, great, whatever, but this movie does not work without Carl Weathers. That's such a good point. Yeah, he's the glue.
Happy Gilmore doesn't work without Carl Weathers.
It does not work without Carl Weathers. Not even close does it work. All right, well, I think we've covered pretty much everything from this. I'm sure there will be people that were like, you didn't talk more about Paulie, but maybe we'll have you guys back. We can get back into it, but this is the point we should get to the awards for this movie. So we give our own anti-capitalist awards for movies. We've got 3 of them, like our little Oscars. Our first award is Best Politics, goes to the character with the best politics in the movie. And this is an interesting one for this movie.
Yeah, this one's hard. We've been going back and forth over it a lot. I mean, it's sometimes you're like, oh, is it like a magical person who's off the side? Is it like the score composer? I don't know, who plays Miles Davis. Great Philly reference. He plays Miles Davis's Summertime, which is sampled by DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince for their seminal song Summertime. So, super Philly.
Do they have the best?
So maybe, I don't no. We kind of came to Creed.
Yeah.
This. Again, I think a lot of it is not necessarily in the text, it's more implied, but I think that it's real, and I can see it in his acting that he is trying to be this perfect person, this perfect guy, so he can be accepted. And all of the capitalism trappings are just him accepting circumstance that he doesn't feel like he can surmount.
Yeah.
He's this big, as we talk about the whole star thing, it's so wild to me that big famous actors still do watch commercials.
Yeah.
I'm like, why do you still have to work for these people? Why? And he's this thing where he's this huge star.
Now internet commercials, not even fancy watch commercials. It's wild now.
Yeah.
It's seeing what's happening.
Yeah. It's do you really need the money? Yeah.
But he's in there. He's like, I can't do, I have to be so perfect. It's it shows the negative effect of the talented tense type of idea of the black exception. He's exceptional and no one cares.
Yeah, no one cares, and he does it all. So yeah, that's our choice.
Yeah, I think that's probably where I was going to land. I mean, you could make the argument against him that he's like an expert capitalist. He knows how to commodify the shit out of this fight, but he doesn't do it for like nefarious reasons in this movie. And I agree with, and for every other reason that you said, like I think he definitely has, I think, the best, most coherent politics. The only other contender would be Marie, the little girl who says "Screw you, creepo."
There you go.
Yeah, agree. That's a good one. That's a good one. I'm gonna go with "Screw you, creepo," because I don't know if I can. Yeah, I guess he has some discernible politics. Everyone here feels very just like in the. Why is everyone, in that icebox to me? Like everyone's in the icebox. No one has a discernible path yet, which is an opportunity, but interesting. This is the first one I feel very conflicted on. So I'm going to go with Screw You, Creepo. Okay, our next award goes to Worst Politics, the character with the worst politics in the movie.
Okay, so crowded field for this one.
Yeah, this one's a bit more. I mean,
you know what? Rocky's sex politics are abhorrent, and all of that might be enough to win him this award. But I'm going to throw in Mickey, the trainer, who, when we are first introduced to him, he's thrown Rocky out of his locker and he says, "I'm running a business, not a charity. You got heart, but you fight like an ape." And only comes around to wanting to help Rocky when he realizes that he can profit off of Rocky, where he can like make money off of Rocky. Rocky has this shot, so now I'm going to like jump on his coattails. I'm going to help him now, but only because he has demonstrated that he can like provide some sort of material value to me. So that's pretty exploitative.
I mean, if we talked about Mickey in it, man. Yeah, because the penguin is kind of garbage. He's like, you suck, Rocky, wah wah wah. But like, Paulie still exists.
Yeah, we didn't talk about Paulie that much.
Paulie or Mick, both of them are like,
the way that he treats his sister. He threw her turkey out the door. I was like, and then he kept the turkey leg for himself.
He's an absolute monster.
Yeah.
He's a problem the whole Rocky series. And Rocky 5, he gambles away all of Rocky's money and they have to move back into the hood.
Yeah, he's very out for himself.
He wants to be the gangster. He's like, can I be the
Can I be the goon?
And he would be, it's like, Paulie would really be breaking people's knuckles. He'd be going too far.
Oh, he did. He's successful in it in Rocky 2. So Paulie's interesting too, because you see his tone of voice even change when he wants something from you. And then immediately lights off when he's like, "Wait, you're not going to give it to me? Well, then I hate you."
Yeah, I didn't even consider Paulie. You're right. He's so terrible to Adrian in the way that he like judges her, the way he throws away her turkey, everything you're saying. Yeah, he's like a petulant baby. Rivka,
I'm going to give it to Rocky because it's not necessarily that it's his politics, but I think what he represents is so dangerous.
Yeah.
And I guess I was just so struck by that moment. Like if it's what's happening in the icebox, Paulie's sucks. Paulie's rageaholic, like all that shit, but Rocky is going to become this symbol that allows for the rest of it to keep going, and that they're all going to put their illusions into and be stuck inside the icebox. And like, if there was anything he individually had going, was he was asking the right questions and got taken advantage of and fucked up, but is going to become very dangerous for that reason. So just because he's a dangerous metaphor.
Wow. Can I just say that this goes to show like how much of a default character he is? I didn't even consider him for any of the awards. I was like, oh, he's just the guy in the movie that runs the movie, right? Everyone else around him has politics.
Yeah.
I mean, I still want to be him.
Right? Well, that's
you do.
Well, and that's why that's what's the right? He's so insidious in that he's so likable despite all of it.
That's why he's so dangerous. And I think it's important to say just where we're at politically, like, we're at a time where I just feel like it's how I felt during like the Obama years and like all the good, the complexity of all of it. And I think it's important to honor that complexity, but also knowing like how dangerous it can be, how capital doesn't give a fuck about complexity. It's like, I'm going to take advantage of that. That's really useful for me and my gain. And we're stuck here being like, but feelings.
All right. I think I'm going to switch my vote to Rocky. I think this has to go to Rocky.
Yeah.
Rocky wins again.
Rocky wins again. He's unstoppable.
Yeah. He didn't even want it. He just wanted to stay in the game.
Yeah.
That's all of us. But isn't that the awesome, amazing capitalism metaphor? Is like, you just want to belong. Someone asked me as an artist, they asked me if I wanted validation or I want to belong. We just want to belong, but we know we have to win to belong. When I moved to New York as a rapper, they told me I couldn't book a show. I had to go and beat 15 other rappers in a rhyme battle where I said mean things about people who share my love of the craft, and then I can belong.
Wow.
Damn.
That's the 8 Mile I want to see.
That's demonstrating the harm of Rocky
Yeah,
in
fair.
real life right there.
Rocky ruined rap battles.
Yeah.
Our last award is Best Supporting Character / Spinoff. Goes to your favorite supporting character that this movie should maybe actually be about.
I mean, Creed, right? I know
They
they
already
made
did it.
I know they made Creed about his son, which
Oh.
you go ahead, say the thing that you're so upset about. I didn't even peep this until recently.
So I don't know if you've watched Creed, but because Creed has kids in the movie, right? When you see the
Yes.
later ones, Creed is about his illegitimate son that came out of nowhere, not his existing son that we know about in the movies, that it could have easily been about and would have been a great story. But they posthumously turned Creed into a deadbeat dad.
For no reason.
Damn.
Wow.
That's right.
Yeah.
Wow. Yep.
But
So-
but Apollo Creed is fascinating. I
Wow.
would have loved to see much more of his story. Again, like I say about, Carl Weathers also being so brilliant and everything.
Yeah, the way that he really did have to navigate it, we only saw the front man part of it, but and there was a little bit of the business side of it, but what was his home life like?
I mean, it's one of the reasons why the sequels are fun to watch, because you get so much more of Carl Weathers' Apollo Creed.
Mm-hmm. That's the right answer for sure. Like Creed,
Yeah.
just like more Carl Weathers, more of his story. I'm fascinated by it. That's the correct answer. The silly answer, like I'm so curious about this street a cappella group. Like, what the fuck is happening there? Who are these kids that are like, yo, we're gonna like light dumpster fires, but also sing flawless a cappella? Like someone's bringing like a pitch pipe with them every day. Like they're practicing these tunes. Like what is the dynamic here? What is happening in this Philly neighborhood?
Well, don't let me bring you the whole Philly soul, gamble, and huff of it all. I mean, we wasn't Motown, but Philly had
Wow.
a huge soul scene there in the 70s. As we talk about being a first-generation artist, my mom had the pipes of Minnie Riperton, but never got into the industry, even the Philly soul scene, because she said that everything was so dirty and so messy.
Yeah. I mean, mine is silly too. I wanted more of the kids or even the streets. I think my favorite scene is when he gets the orange thrown at him when he's running. And that was real. That wasn't like staged. That was someone just because they were just stealing shots because they gave them no budget, and someone just threw that orange at him. Like people were just throwing shit. Like, who the fuck
Philly.
is this? But then he takes it and turns it into this like lovely moment.
That's such a Philly moment.
That is.
So, there's a whole lot more movies in this series as we've discussed. Maybe we can have you come back and do more because this was so much fun. But before we wrap, we like to discuss with our guests how we as artists and people strive to practice values, be them anti-capitalist values, leftist values in your own lives, even with all the complexities and contradictions. And I know we spoke a lot about, I know your work does a lot of that, but is there one thing that you wanted to share, a practice that you engage with?
Wait, before we wrap, we're going to wrap after this? Sorry, just wrap.
He's always ready to rap.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because it's in our work, because our
So
work
much.
is so much of our life.
Yeah.
So it is partially in that. I don't know if you want to kick off. We thought a lot about this part.
We did. And we were like, do we go with like, hey, we spent a year figuring out how to not shop on Amazon? That's one thing that we've done. That was a whole journey.
By the way, it's not a judgment on you if you do. It's just, and not even a boycott thing. It's sometimes you just got to say, that's not me. I'm not going to feed into that one.
Yeah. And we had many arguments about it because I loved Amazon, but now I'm on the other side of it. But
Yeah, tall women are fine, just not online.
there you go. Yeah.
That could be a whole series in itself, just hearing you both discuss that journey. Seriously.
Yeah. I mean,
Fascinating.
I think that's one of the big things that we do. I guess it's in our work because we try to live this in our lives and then put it on display and make it a lesson for people. That's my thing as an actor, performer, writer. I, will take my own harmful experiences and then try to create. When I say that I'm a theater, rapper, and educator, do it all at once, I tend to make one person theater shows that are rap albums that are curricula. And it's about us finding these problems and seeing how we can get in there together and using the lessons to do that.
Yeah. And, being a financial planner and seeing how the sausage is made was a really interesting thing. And when I struck out on my own, one of the questions that I got all the time was, why do you focus on people of color? Shouldn't you do financial planning for everyone? And I finally had an answer to this question. And I was like, you can't say you do something for everyone if you're not actually specific about who you're doing it for. If I didn't learn how to plan for people of color, then I wasn't doing financial planning for everyone. I was doing financial planning in the specific way that I learned that was actually made for white people. And so I think in our work and in our personal life, the specificity of how we go about doing things and like going down the rabbit hole of the racial wealth divide, down the rabbit hole of like why artists, going down the rabbit hole of like foster youth and youth prisons and things like that, being more specific means you are actually doing this for everyone. And I think when you can figure out, oh, this is the lane that I'm going to be in, and I'm going to be a part of that collective movement to say, hey, now we're for everyone. You don't have to actually do everything for everyone to say you're for everyone.
You know, I've become a little bit of a minor entomologist in my work. I do a lot of research project rap albums. I spend a year researching internet comments. And one that I wanted to leave y'all with that I think encapsulates a lot of how we do and what we've done is the word villain. Y'all know where the word villain comes from?
Mm-mm.
It's a medieval English word, and it comes from villa or villager. It means poor farmhand. And what it used to mean was lazy.
Whoa.
It used to be rich folks saying these poor farmhands are lazy. And y'all know how lazy quickly turns into avarice, right? Can you think of a better word for the adversary, for the enemy than villain? When it just means poor folks.
Wow.
And I dig into a lot of that history creatively. We dig into it in terms of where we find our work and how we relate to people so that we can understand that this been happening. This ain't us. And we can make us by letting go of that stuff.
That was awesome. We're so overjoyed to have you as guests. We will link to where everyone can find your work and research more in the podcast. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was a blast.
It was a lot of fun.
Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok. And if you want to support the show and get access to our Patreon episodes, the link is in the episode description in your podcast player or at mvcpod.com.
For next week's movie, we will be watching Oliver Stone's 1994 crime drama thriller, 1994 psychological crime drama, Natural Born Killers.
Thanks, everyone.